Welcome to Washington Square News. This is Op-Ed Live. I'm joined by two of our new deputy opinion editors, Tommy Collison and Matthew Tesler. Thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you.
So we're going to go back a few weeks. We're going to talk about the January 7th Charlie Hebdo attack. After the attack, Charlie Hebdo, feeling emboldened, chose to publish more images of depicting the Prophet Muhammad, more cartoons. Though these were more sympathetic, they have been controversial just the same. A lot of New York papers, the United States papers, chose not to republish them. Dean Baquet of the New York Times, the executive editor, was one of those who chose not to republish. If you were in his shoes, in Dean Baquet's shoes, would you have printed the cartoons?
I mean, if I was the executive editor of the New York Times, I would also have not published the cartoons. And I think there's been a huge outpouring of support after the attacks to, like, you know, Je suis Charlie and, you know, going out and buying a subscription to the magazine. And I don't think that's actually very, I don't think that's a net positive. I don't see the point of, like, supporting a magazine that has, like, made a name for itself of just, like, insulting everyone left, right, and center.
I'll come back to that point, but what do you think? Would you
Yeah, I don't
print
think
them?
I don't think that it's appropriate to print them. I think that even though you know, what happened to the people at Charlie Hebdo was horrible and it was completely inappropriate, I don't think that makes what they were printing in the first place appropriate, because it was still depicting the Prophet Muhammad, which is seen as completely sacrilegious, and just because what they were doing could be seen as more sympathetic after the attacks doesn't make it, you know, appropriate in the first place.
Yeah, a sympathetic depiction of Prophet Muhammad is to Muslims
Right, it's like
oxymoronic.
it's almost, yeah, it's an oxymoron.
Okay, Tommy. So, Charlie Hebdo is incendiary. It makes its money that way.
Mm-hmm.
But in that way, I mean, by criticizing Charlie Hebdo, by not defending its right to free speech, I mean, on what grounds does The Onion stand, or do any of, like, the papers that we so treasure here
Well, I mean, I think there's a difference.
and around Europe, not necessarily here?
Right. But I think there's a difference between, like, satire that's kind of actually humorous, and then satire that the punching bag of the joke or whatever is this, like, maligned group. And I mean, there's a huge wave of, like, anti-Islam sentiment in France, and, like, Charlie Hebdo is doing nothing to try and quell that. And I mean, like, even after the attacks themselves, there was, like, 12 or 13 attacks on mosques in the, like, ensuing 2 days.
Do you think leaving Muslims alone by not discussing them or not satirizing them, it helps them? I mean, do you think?
Well, I think there's
hands off is better for the rampant anti-Muslim sentiment in France and across Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for kind of critiquing ideas and, you know, shining a light on ideas and
That's where
looking
improvement comes from.
Right. But I think there's a way of doing that without being kind of incendiary and without dealing with stereotypes. As we can talk about kind of the anti-Semitic feeling in the U.S. without leaning on kind of Jewish stereotypes.
Right. I think what has to be said, because, you know, just printing these pictures of the Prophet Muhammad, I mean, I think that could just be shown as mean and bullying. Maybe a better way of doing that would be, instead of just depicting the Prophet Muhammad, maybe depicting in a satirical manner the people that are, you know, criticizing the Muslim people in general for what they're doing and criticizing the Islamic community. I think maybe that would be more constructive. I just don't think that directly depicting the Prophet Muhammad really does much.
Though it must be said that Charlie Hebdo was critical of most religions. And,
Yes,
you know.
sure.
But yeah, I mean, the question is, like, what good would come from these images, from publishing these images? I mean, was their aim to address some of the problems they see in, like, the Quran and the Muslim faith? I mean, because if I don't see they're not trying to. I mean, what's the point? I mean,
Yeah,
that's the question.
Well,
I'm
I mean,
asking.
it's much easier to draw a cartoon of the Prophet naked than it is to, like, have a reasoned, like, well-articulated argument of what you see as the shortcomings of a religion.
Is Charlie Hebdo to you? Is it journalism? In the past few weeks, at least.
I think that some of the things they do could be journalism, but just printing a picture just to print a picture, just to make a point, I don't think really makes a point at all.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen kind of, like, it's very easy and it's very popular to come out in defense of journalism. I mean, we had the march of, like, all of the leaders and everything defending freedom of speech after the attacks and everything. But I mean, you know, David Cameron was there and he was marching, but he has his own kind of troubled record with arresting people for making, or people in Britain being arrested for posting things on Facebook. I mean, how do you go to France and march after these attacks and then not make the changes or not do the same thing at home?
As student journalists, how do how do you reconcile your defense of freedom of speech, and your criticism of Charlie Hebdo?
I think that you just have to be constructive about it. I think that directly insulting an entire religion isn't really constructive at all unless you have greater commentary to it. So I think that you just have to always try to be constructive about it.
Be constructive.
Yeah, and I mean,
Not destructive, sorry.
Right, and I mean, like as a journalism student, what you're learning about news gathering and journalism is that it's what citizens need to make kind of informed decisions. Like, does Charlie Hebdo meet this definition? I really don't think so.
I mean, you made a comment before we started filming about the people doing satirical work should be punching up. They should be, you're right. They should.
Yeah. I think it's like, you can make the argument that Charlie Hebdo published cartoons about every religion, but there's a difference between satirizing the dominant feeling or the dominant religion in a country and taking a stab at the marginalized groups.
Yeah, it kind of just piles it on, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's not a very brave thing to do to kind of like.
So you think the opposite, that it's not? This isn't very brave.
No, I think that it's really important that we defend the right to say these things, but like I don't have to either agree or think what you're saying is constructive. As in, I
That's
think
fair.
we should live in a world with Charlie Hebdo, but I think it's not like our world is not particularly actionably better because it exists.
We should live in a world where you can say these things,
Right.
and your right to say them is protected. But
Right.
you maybe
Have you tried not
should
being
not.
insulting?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There you go. Thank you guys for joining me.
Yeah,
I think
thank you.
It's an important conversation. Thank you for watching Op-Ed Live this week. If you like this content and want to see more like it, check out our YouTube page or our Twitter page or our Facebook page, and I think we have an Instagram page. Check them all out and maybe give us a like on all three. Thanks so much.